The $1,000,000 question: how do entrepreneurs transition from self-employed to owning a business that turns a profit? My name is Chris Waters, and this podcast has the $1,000,000 answer. Welcome to CEO Secrets. This is Chris Waters of CEO Secrets. Super excited to have Tim Harris, the co-founder of Tim and Julie Harris Real Estate Coaching. For over 2 decades, Tim and Julie Harris have been leaders in the real estate industry, first as top producing agents and now as the nation's most sought after real estate coaches. And Tim, you're joining us today from your recently new residence in Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, that's right. Yep. Well, okay, so this might be a Zoom backdrop. It might not be real, but that is what it looks like about a 3-minute walk from our house.
So Tim, how did you get started in real estate? 20 years ago, how did you and your wife find yourself in real estate? And
I wish it was 20 years ago. It was longer than that.
What was it you read a book? What was the turning point to even get you in?
Well, I'm 50, so I grew up watching infomercials from Carlton Sheets and whatnot. So I don't know, you're too young to even know who he was. But he was this guy that would be on TV with his Rolls Royce, and he was selling basic information to consumers on how to become real estate investors, But anyway, so I remember watching one of those things. I was just a kid, and I put the money together, and I bought his collection of tapes. And I remember listening to those when I was a teenager. It's funny you should ask that. I don't know why I just remembered that, but I hadn't had that thought forever. But Julie and I met in high school. We've been married for 29 years this year. We got married when she was 20 and I was 21. And we bought our first house while we were still in college. And we were essentially, 22 and 23, somewhere in there. And we got into real estate shortly thereafter. Our first year in business, we sold over 100 houses. With pendings, we sold 103 houses. And we consistently sold between 100 and 200 houses in 10 years. We got into the coaching business. I'm skipping a lot, obviously. But we got into the coaching business, honestly, by accident. Howard Brinton, I don't know if you remember him, Chris. He was,
the stars, right? It was a big conference in the real estate industry.
So he made Julie and I stars in either 97 or 98. I don't remember. And we were at an event that he was doing, and he had maybe 2,500 people in the room, and Julie and I were in the back, and wearing our required, black Howard Brinton t-shirts. And I remember Howard was wonderful. He's passed on, but so he was doing this, normal Howard Brinton routine. And then right before the break, he goes, and I'm going to start a coaching company, or we're going to start taking on coaches, coaching clients. And it was a totally disorganized pitch, just sort of off the cuff. He hadn't really thought about it. It was obvious. He said, so if you're interested in learning more about coaching, bring your business card up on stage and we'll collect them at the break. Okay, so remember, we're in the back of the room, and we saw a good 75% of the room just get up and rush down to throw business cards on the stage. And I was what the hell did we just see? We saw the start of something new in our industry. He started something huge by accident. And so then we were on break, and then a couple people came up to us and asked us, are you guys coaching? Is this something you guys are going to do? And I didn't, what the hell is coaching? I had no idea. We'd done shadowing before. Do they even do that anymore, Chris? I don't even, where someone flies in, they spend the day with you and pay you $3,500 or whatever, sort of.
Yeah. I think there's people out there that do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had done that, but we had never coached before. So one of our first coaching clients was a guy named Michael Gordon, and his wife and him, Michael and Robin Gordon, are now, I think, number 2 or 3 with Berkshire Hathaway. They sell on the main line. And, so from that initial, yes, I'll take on the opportunity to offer coaching, but we didn't know how to do it. And then we just learned from there. And, that's pretty much, it's not a straight line to where we are now, but that's essentially how we got here. We had to learn a lot. And then we worked for, a coaching company for a while, a different coaching company. And then, we restarted our own coaching company actually in 2007. So, that's basically how we got here.
And so you published a book, Harris Rules. You're wearing, I see the hat for Harris Rules. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's I haven't read it yet. What's the premise of the book?
Well, I'm not going to tell you, but it's a real page turner. You have to buy it to get it. No, so Harris rules basically the way this is essentially what happens when Julie and I have each had over 100,000 one-on-one calls, well over, and this is the result, right? So when we take all of our, the best practices that we learned helping people achieve their results in their real estate businesses, and we want to encapsulate that into essentially what a roadmap, a roadmap, and that's really what this is. And if you read, we have almost 400 five-star reviews on Amazon. So when was that your kid coming in to bug you? Yeah, mine's going to do that any moment now. It's okay.
Yeah, it's my daughter's Eva.
How old is she?
She's 3.
Oh, she's not going to away.
This is the best part of shelter in place is like we're all on the same playing field nowadays because so many people are working from home.
Do you notice how everyone's been forced to become way more informal now because of this?
Yeah.
I love it personally. It's great.
So let me ask you something about the book. So if somebody's listening to this and they're curious of how to get a book to become a #1 bestseller on Amazon, is there any secret ingredients, if you will, like Tim Ferriss talked about kind of like strategy a couple different times of like how to launch a book? Is there anything you did special to help improve, how well the book ranked just to help sell more books?
Podcast, truthfully, Chris. I mean, Julie and I have been doing this for so long that we have I don't think we're famous. I think we're micro famous, right? So Julie and I are micro famous. If you're in real estate and if you're in one of the markets that we market to and have marketed to forever, you know who we are. So if you can it's the Seth Godin thing, right? If you can have 1,000 people that, give a crap what you have to say and you want to come out with a product, you're going to probably sell it to, a good number of them, double digits, 20 or 30%. Mm-hmm. Well, the book I think is for sale on Amazon for $11. The book sells like wildfire because of our podcast. I mean, our podcast let's say on a Saturday, right, which is a low listens day, that might have, 7,500, maybe 10,000 people listen to it. But on a good weekday, like a Wednesday or Thursday, it's going to be upwards to 20,000. So we have a lot of people that have been listening to us for a long time, and so the book kind of sells itself. And that's the reason. That's the reason we got it published too. It isn't self-published, which is, to answer your question, the other thing is you want to make sure you try to find a good publisher because they'll carry. I couldn't have gotten into Barnes & Noble on my own. We had to have a publisher do that.
Let me ask you something. The podcast. How long has your podcast been out there? How long have you been?
4 years, going on 5 years, maybe.
Did you find like a certain point where you guys reached a critical mass where there was this huge inflection point, or was it just very gradual, incremental growth over 5 years?
The latter for sure. Yeah, that's the only real way to do it. But here's the thing: it's fascinating. Ultimately, the reason, like if you're going to be a media syndicator, right? If you're going to create content, this is content. Podcasts are content. A book is content. The only real way you can do it is if your content doesn't suck. Because if your content is good, what happens is people share it. If that's it, there's no marketing for this book whatsoever, none. And the book still sells incredibly well. And the audiobook version, we got an advance on this, right? This is published by a publisher, and they have, having somebody professional that's working, helping you put it together is really critical. There's a lot of self-published books out there, and some of them are great, but they're not as good as if you have an actual professional organization behind you. Like Julie did most of the work on the book. The concepts are both ours, but she was the one doing most of the work. And she had like 2 full-time editors. Like there's different varying levels of editing that you have to go through on a book. And it is insanely detailed. But if you're going to do something, it's like a child, once this thing is done and it's out there, you got to make it the best version of what it is because you can't pull it back. You can't say, you know what, now I'm thinking chapter 3 wasn't as good as it should have been. Everyone who bought the book, return it. I got to edit it. So, it's an incredible experience, honestly. Doing something you really, it's creating something.
So you've written many books, Think and Grow Rich for Real Estate, The Team Real Estate Treasure Map, Part-Time Agent to Full-Time Superstar.
We give all those away. Those are basically all self-published.
So when it comes to books, like for people that are listening to this podcast that are, maybe they're not in real estate, maybe they're just entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, business owners.
Sure.
Would you encourage those type of people to publish a book to try to, create credibility and maybe authority and, maybe even a potential lead source for them for their own respective business?
So it depends what your goal is, right? So as far as a book that's for sale in Barnes and Noble and things like that does give you a higher level of credibility. So if you're trying to be a marketer, your goal is just, you have to cut through all the noise that's in the marketplace. And I tell agents this, and I tell small business owners this, the number one thing everyone should be doing is starting a podcast, no doubt. Starting a podcast, the opportunities in podcasting is, it's amazing. I've never seen anything. Well, there's just different statistics. I have some of them memorized because I'm studying this. Because Julie and we have enough audience now that we're wanting to monetize it other than just selling our own products, right? And we've been solicited by a couple of organizations that want us to start running ads. And I'm looking at, so there's different ways to monetize. You can do like what most podcasters do. Like we listen to Ben Shapiro every day. Julie and I go on a 6-mile walk around the Ritz-Carlton here, and we listen to him every day because his podcast is almost the same amount of time it takes for us to hustle around. And he does affiliate links. So he'll say, you know what an affiliate link, and your listeners probably do too. But then what's coming into the space is like Spotify just bought Joe Rogan Experience for $110 million. And it's like a 4 or 5 year contract, right? So you're seeing other of these big organizations that are trying to control, like iTunes, right? Apple TV, they're creating their own content and they're only pushing it through their channels. So if you want to watch, it doesn't matter what, you have to go to Apple TV for that exclusive content. Well, the podcasting space is starting to do the same thing. There's crazy podcasts you never heard of before that they start getting traction. They'll have fewer listeners than ours will. And then like Spotify will buy them and put them on their platform or some of the others, big podcasting platforms. And next thing you know, they have millions and millions of listeners because they expose those podcasts to other podcasts. Like right now, you're exposing me to your people. I'm probably going to use this to expose you to my people, the whole thing. So if you're wanting to really syndicate messages that get it out at the highest, it's not video anymore. Video is too saturated. It's definitely podcasting. And then write a book and then start a coaching company.
Tim, before you were famous in real estate and you were getting started with your first business with your wife and you were building a real estate team, what were some of your most effective lead? Where did you guys generate your business? Was it referral? Did you have like lead generation systems in place? Like what were you doing back then when you had your business?
Well, there really was no buying leads back then. So everything that we did was proactive based. We went out, the traditional things, like how did we sell 100 houses when we were just basically kids our first year? Well, we went after for sale by owners and expireds. We had no center of influence past client list. We didn't have any scripts. We had no training. I picked some, we got some bits and pieces here, but really what I learned from that first year, especially going after FSBOs, which, to this day is still an amazing source of business for agents that are willing to do it, is that you don't really have, if you just have energy and enthusiasm and you have some basic understanding of a script, you're going to kick some serious butt because most other agents never will. So we'd knock on doors at FSBOs. Then we started calling expireds. And then the business grew from there. And by the way, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned teams and all of that. We did scale a team. Julie and I did have 6 or 7 buyers agents. And I remember fast forwarding here, our revenue in our coaching and our real estate business always increased every year. But I remember it was like the 3rd or 4th year, our accountant, his name was Fred, was sitting in our house in New Albany, Ohio, and he comes over and he says, he wasn't giving me business advice, but he was kind of calling me a dumbass. He said, this was your revenue and these were your expenses and this is how much you actually netted this year. And then he showed me what the net was our first year, when it's basically just Julie and I doing the real work of real estate. And we actually had more profit that first year than we did when we were selling way more units and getting all the awards and the plaques and the trophies. And everyone said we walked on water. So we pushed our volume up. Everyone thought we were real estate badasses, but we were actually netting less than we had that first year. Because we were diluting it too much. And we did start doing postcards. We did start, before the internet, buying leads and things like that. And we got away from really with the whole reason that we originally got into real estate was we didn't have it verbalized and worked out in our heads like this. But the reason was because we wanted to be rich where our money worked for us. We no longer had to work for our money. And we were moving further and further away from that as we started to follow, this whole team business model that Howard Britton was a big proponent of. And we sort of knew, like we were at a Howard Britton event once. It was just the Howard Stars. We were sitting around this big table. There was maybe only 60 of us at the time, maybe only 40, I don't remember. And I remember all the stars were talking about adding team buyer agents, adding this, doing this, listing. This is back when, you got to hire a listing partner. It was the new best thing since sliced bread. They were talking about moving trucks and all these other types of expensive things. And then he had his university classes where for $5,000 you train your buyer's agents, and he did a great job. Well, then he wanted you to bring him back, and he trained him to be listing specialists, and wanted him to bring it. So he was essentially trying to sell you into the idea that everyone needs to be cross-trained, which is the same sort of insanity that's taught nowadays, to be honest with you. And I asked the question, why would I want to, it was, maybe I was being a smart ass. I probably was, right? I was cocky. I was in my 20s. And I asked, why would I want to train my future competitor? And I'd never seen him so pissed off in his life. Like somehow I was, spitting on the altar of some team religion. And that's when I realized in that very moment, maybe it was the genesis of that moment. I realized that model and that mindset wasn't about making profit and getting rich. It was about something else that I didn't want to overly associate with, because it would keep me beholden to essentially this sort of transactional-based lifestyle. Even if it was other people doing the transactions, I'm still beholden to it. And that's not how I couldn't see a way forward thinking like that.
Got it. Do you think if you could have gone back in time and changed the financial model and potentially the organizational structure, it could have been more profitable than what you and Julie did alone?
No, because I've coached so many teams. I know the numbers of brokerages and teams, and I see so much outward. It's in Texas, that you're in Texas, right? They call it tall hat, no cattle. Okay. You know what that means. It's a rancher who has this big, beautiful cowboy hat who walks around like he owns 1 billion head of cattle. But the reality of that, he has a really nice hat but no cattle. And in the industry right now, there's a lot of tall hat, no cattle.
Why do you think so few people in the industry using the team-centric model are able to get to making, call it 7 figures in net income? Like, why are so few people able to do that? What do you feel like is lacking or preventing people from actually being able to execute and do that? And I'm assuming like this, so you were, building your businesses like late 90s, early 2000s, and this is right after Gary Keller published The $1 Million Real Estate Agent, and there was this huge trend, I assume, that happened. I was in high school when this was going on, maybe in middle school. But like, I imagine that's like what, got everybody, like Gary wrote this book, The $1 Million Real Estate Agent.
Chris, you know where that book came from?
I imagine studying other people.
Do you know who he specifically got all the ideas from?
I don't know who, but like I remember in the book he referenced a bunch of people like he learned from, and there was somebody in there that's in Houston, Texas, named Ronnie, and his wife Kathy.
Howard Brennan. I'm answering my question. So if you look at the original publication of the book, there's this black and white picture. I think all those people are Howard Brennan people, and so. I don't want to talk too much about that, but the reality of it is the ideas for the Millionaire Real Estate Agent all came from what Howard Brennan was teaching. Now I have a question for you, and I'm going to challenge you, maybe not so much because I got to know you somewhat. You're smart. So why would a brokerage push upon agents building a team if the brokerage knows from looking at other team members' P&L statements? To your question, why is the broker motivated to try to influence people like you to build a team if they know ultimately people like you don't make any money from it, not real money?
Well, something you and I were talking about offline is like, I never really saw the difference between teams and brokerages. And in fact, if you buy like the typical, real estate franchise business and you get a copy of the operations manual, it's, like you're in the agent count game, not the agent productivity game. And so there becomes a law of diminishing return where it's actually disadvantageous for the franchisee or broker owner to like push somebody to have a really successful team.
Yeah, because they don't make any money on it, which goes back to your question. So why are so few teams making money? So when Julie and I were selling real estate, you could still get 6 and 7% commission. You could still charge a processing fee of $700, $1,000. And still, even at that, on the book. So when I look at somebody like a team member, and this, I'm getting tons of inquiries like this because all these teams were essentially never profitable. To your point, you're exactly right. Most of these teams have the same shitty profit margins as most small brokerage, which is less than 3%. Most of them are making around 2%. Some of the ones where the agent who runs the team, the Chris Waters of the group, he's still selling real estate But if he takes his transactions out of it, just looks at the transactions, the expenses to support the transactions that are coming in on the buyer agent side, he's making no money. And I've had conversation after conversation. People don't think like that. The number one Keller Williams agent, for example, in Wilco, right? Just north of you. So I had this very conversation with him. He told me all of his numbers. I don't want to say his name because it was, a coaching call. And I broke it down. I'll tell you his numbers. It was 1.8 million. And so he had always been taught by all his Keller Williams stuff. Okay, well, this is what this is. This is your profit. This is your profit. And I asked him, I said, how many, you're still listing houses? And he said, yes. I said, well, how much money of the 1.8 did you make from your commissions from listing houses? He had to look at a spreadsheet. It was very well organized. It was great. And then he told me the number. And it was like, the essence of it is $100,000 that he earned from listing houses was going to subsidize the other side of the business because the other side of the business was essentially running negative. And that's the typical pattern I see with all these teams. As soon as the team leader stops doing the real work, which is with regards to working with sellers, and they start delegating it, their margins get cut in half. Now, Chris Heller, and I coached some of the people on his team back when he sold real estate full-time in San Diego. He did it right. He had all of his people basically, now he did do some buying with leads, but his people were all working the phones. I mean, they would pound the phones. Monica Reynolds was running his team for a while, runs Maps Coaching now. And, that's what they did. They worked the phones, calling physicals, calling expireds. That's high margin work because you're not buying the lead. So why is it that?
Do you think it's potentially like a lack of, number one, like the things I'm hearing you say, which I tend to agree with, is it's a lack of like financial modeling acumen. It's a lack of like understanding the organizational structure in terms of how to level up leadership and have a financial model to afford leaders so that you can exit the business. And then, third, understanding like how you, from a lead generation perspective, you've got to be very mindful of your client acquisition cost in order to have a profitable business and drive revenue and afford leadership so you can truly exit the business. And ideally, if you're doing that and you're underneath a brokerage, it could actually be to your detriment, and it may be more beneficial to just be your own independent brokerage because you're basically the supervising broker anyways.
Well, the most profitable people I've ever coached were the ones that basically, and you look at nationwide, this is true. They're the ones that focus primarily on, so if I were to get back into real estate, I have people asking this occasionally, what would you do? And the funny thing, Chris, is they're expecting me to say something different than we say in our coaching program, which is always really funny, hold on, you think it was this? Well, so Julie and I would definitely focus on working the phones and going after the proactive lead generation. We would probably not work with any buyers, truthfully. We would refer the buyers out for like a 35% referral fee. Obviously, if you had a seller that wanted to buy something, maybe then it would make sense. But if you take buyer leads and you refer those out for say 30 or 35%, you're actually going to make more net profit than you would if those agents work for you on average based on the numbers that are coming out. So to what your point is, I like what you said. It makes sense. But the number one reason I think that people are being seduced into the team model and all the other fallacies that go along with it is lack of exposure. So a lot of people get into real estate that have no, and I was like this, Julie and I, went to college and we had a car cleaning and detailing business. I mean, we had to learn on the job. It's fascinating to us. I can tell it is to you too. It's fun. Figuring out the Rubik's Cube of businesses is exciting. But the reality of it is most people coming into real estate have no exposure. So they don't know how to look at a business model and understand really what the ramifications of it are. Well, everyone is telling me that I'm supposed to build this big team, add more buyer's agents. There's actual pressure inside different, let's keep on talking about Keller Williams because it's relevant, right? Because they're the ones that sort of took this team model and took it to the next level. But you had a good first year, now hire an assistant. Hire 2 assistants. Now it's time for you to build your team. Now you got to add 6 buyer's agents. What about your branding? What about your website? What about all this stuff? And so that's what starts happening fast and furious. And the agent's seduced by it. Oh my gosh, Chris, you're the greatest things in sliced bread. Look at all your amazing awards and your plaques. Do you want to speak at our next whatever? Da, 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 da. And you're seduced by it. And you're saying, well, oh my God, they're basically feeding your ego. And they're pulling you along this string, but no one ever stops you to say, okay, bro, why are you doing this? What's the point? No one says, have you ever actually had conversations like what you and I are having right now, where you really drill down on what the profit is? it's a sad fact that, so you can sell. I've had this, we've had different scenarios that Julie and I modeled out on our podcast, trying to drill down on this point, is that you can have an individual practitioner in, say, for example, Columbus, Ohio, where Julie and I sold real estate, maybe one agent and maybe one assistant, and they can make $200,000, right? That's the total GCI. Their net will actually be better. Just that main agent with an assistant will actually be better than, say, the agent that has a team where they make $1 million. The agent that has the team with $1 million will actually make less net profit in a lot of cases than the person who's earning, say, 200 to 225. And that's something that people don't understand. So why go? You can't sell your team; it has no value. So why bother doing it? Just to do more transactions, so you can walk around saying you're the big, that kind of thing. That's the insanity of it all.
The thing that I feel like I've discovered is there's been this roadmap people have been selling about people use the word team, but it's just an organizational structure, right? And the idea of the team is like, try to be more like they do it in corporate America with more specialized roles. And so I feel like a lot of models, financial models, strategies, roadmaps, if you will, specific to this team-centric business, or let's call it corporate brokerage, are inaccurate and are flawed. And people have, there's actually nobody out there that has successfully scaled the team model in a profitable way and been able to help others replicate that success. I don't know. Do you know of anybody that has?
Nope. And I don't know of anyone that's really sold their business either, like really a real transaction, not just basically, long-based referral or agreement. So you're saying, we're saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. So if you want to be successful in real estate, I mean, Chris, you're massively successful in real estate. If you want to be successful in real estate, go where the money is. It's going to be on the listing side of the business. And the nice thing about the listing side of the business is that's where all the leverage is. Mm-hmm. It's not on the buyer side. And don't be seduced. Ask yourself what's your motivation for hiring all those buyer's agents? Because somebody else got more plaques and awards than you? The whole thing's insanity. You're just being manipulated by your ego. And what does that take away from you? It's taking away your life energy. It's taking away your true potential. It's taking away time with your kids because, oh my gosh, I got to hire 3 buyer's agents so I can kick Bob's ass this year for awards.
We have a lot of people that watch this that are mortgage, title, entrepreneurs, technology, but specifically in the real estate industry, for people that have no idea what we're talking about, you're alluding to agents that specifically work with buyers, and there's a lot less leverage available through people because it's a much more time-intensive transaction. Now, you could use showing assistants, inside sales, things of that.
There goes your profit.
Yeah. So the one thing that I disagree with is I think one of the things that has eluded the real estate industry is a career trajectory path for agents. When you get in real estate, you learn listings, leads, and leverage. And so I believe that if you as a leader, ultimately, if you come from the perspective of being a servant leader and like helping lead people to success, ultimately you want to have a really clear career trajectory roadmap. And the reason Fortune 500 companies become so successful is because they learn how to help their people level up from a skills perspective. So in this organizational structure of a brokerage that's very team-centric and you have a lot of specialized roles, in my opinion, the advantage of starting people out as buyer's agents is because it helps them learn some of the basic sales stuff without like overwhelming them in a short period of time. For example, like contracts are typically skewed in the interest of buyers, not sellers. When you think about like, how you work with a buyer versus a seller from a sales perspective, there's different things you have to master. For example, the inside sales component of working, like converting a seller versus a buyer, much different. The outside sales component of working with a buyer or seller is different. The market expertise point, that's kind of similar. If you start somebody off that's brand new to real estate and you think that ultimately like your mission statement as a business is to develop people from a career trajectory path, because if they're successful, then ultimately the organization is successful, then it's less about, I'm not saying it's not about profit, because I actually disagree with you about how to make the buy side profitable, but I know we won't have enough time for that. But my point is if you focus on developing people and starting them off in specialized roles so it'll help them lead to mastery faster. So for example, on the buy side, it's like first master inside sales, second master outside sales, third market expertise. And that market expertise component will translate into the listing side. So after you kind of master those three components, then you shift over to the listing side and kind of level up. And then once you've mastered the listing side, then people can promote within your organization to become leaders or peer coaches to help other people develop. And
but Chris, this is the same dogma that basically the people have been saying since the 90s. I mean, hopefully it's for a future friend. It's the same thing that so again, my perspective is someone who's, been in different corners of the boxing ring. And as a coach, as a business owner, I appreciate what you're saying. And respectfully, I don't completely agree with that part of business being just create some sort of nurturing, loving environment where people are getting jobs, they're earning money. And I wrote a question down that I'll ask you in a second. But the moral of the story is most people getting into real estate, they have no interest whatsoever there's no potential for them to succeed trying to do what you just said. It's impossible. Because the reality of it is most of these people are, real estate doesn't attract a lot of the Harvard business graduates, right? And so you're not going to, there's a tiny minority of people that will take what you're saying, which is again, sort of the corporate approach to how internal teams are structured. It's sort of the dogma of the modern business guru that's come up since arguably since probably I'm guessing like 92, 93. That's when books that started to talk about teams and all that really started to get momentum. And a team is a macro trend. And there's going to be other things that follow that will also, because I frankly think technology and whatnot is going to make it so the lack of profitability on teams could actually pivot and change, but we'll have to see how that plays out. But the question I wrote down is, and this is something that it's, for me, from what you were just saying, when I talk to coaching clients like this, and I tell them this, they sometimes find this offensive, but it's true. And first of all, most people's dream is to basically have passive income and enough that they don't have to worry about money anymore, where they're rich, where their money works for them, and they no longer have to work for their money. If you cut through all of it, that's ultimately, I get the personal quest and the enjoyment of helping develop other people and all the challenges and all that. But ultimately, the purpose of working, the purpose of creating a business is to create money. That's really, unless you're running a nonprofit, you have to have a profit. And so when having had these thoughts for so long, it occurred to me that you don't get rich selling real estate. It's impossible to get rich selling real estate. You get rich from the profits that you get from selling real estate. You get rich from the profits you get from selling real estate. So if you have no profit because you're running, 2 and 3% margins, you don't have enough money left over to basically reinvest it to essentially, do other things to create passive income, like the things we were talking about before you started recording. I mean, so what I wanted personally, and what I want for our coaching clients is, I love everything you said. It sounds good. It sounds good to say. It sounds good to hear, but it's too complicated. Respectfully, okay? Hopefully I'm not offending you, but it's too complicated for 99% of people to ever wrap their minds around. And it's not what 99% of people truly want. They want to be able to spend time with their families and not worry about money. They want to be able to go to Disney World and spoil their families. They want to be able to, donate more money to their church, synagogue, or mosque. That's what drives most people.
Yeah, I mean, in the real estate world, been very fortunate to be able to test a system model structure and retention strategy to, net 25 to 40% profits, and the business owner isn't, a producing agent. And I've done that in multiple markets. So I think I believe wholeheartedly it is possible. And I believe one of the things that's missing, and this isn't just in the real estate industry, but this is more of like a global thing, is there's a lot of coaching and training out there about tactical things like lead generation or getting better at sales. But it's, like when I think about the real estate industry, for example, and this again probably transcends a lot of industries, it's like there's this huge lack of like leadership. Like there's not a lot of leadership training to like talk about like, what are some of the strategic things you can do to be able to create that opportunity for agents within your organization to be able to have investments in real estate so they can actually own real estate versus sell it. Because I agree wholeheartedly, you get rich from owning real estate, not selling it. And so,
and other assets, not just real estate. There's a lot of ways to make money.
yeah, right. As a young person in my late 20s, trying to find people that like, in my late 20s, I'm kind of like, what does being a leader mean? Does that mean you're a great speaker? Like, what exactly what does that mean? And like, where do you learn how to be a great leader?
Just saying that, again, I resonate with you, right? I totally understand where you're coming from, but it's not a practical, tactical thing for someone to aspire to, because when it's Jordan Peterson's The 12 Rules of Life or whatever it is. Everyone should read that book. It's fantastic. Start with being a leader in your own family, right? Start being with a leader within your own community.
Yep.
And just do that really, really well. This whole idea that we have to have some sort of take care of your immediate surroundings. Put your own mask on first, right? I mean, that's really what people should be focusing on being a leader. Because really this whole outward looking outside, and again, you're not normal. So, as it pertains to the masses, because we have a huge audience and podcast listeners, and a minority of them are like you because you're like a minority of people, right? You're an oddball. Not very many people think like you, and that's a compliment, right? Right. But so if you're going to deliver a message, getting back to something you asked a bit ago, that's going to that people are going to be receptive to, the message is going to have to be urgent. It's going to have to be essentially do this, take action steps, and the information you're going to disseminate has to be powerful and has to be practical. So when you talk about big, lofty concepts, which everyone likes to talk about because they're easy to talk about because there's no drill down on it. What you talk, and I know you're drilling down in your own business. I'm just talking in general, right? So when you talk about these big, lofty concepts, which everyone likes to talk about, for most people, they just listen and they feel intimidated because there's no takeaway for them. They don't feel empowered by this idea that so what you're saying is, as a business owner, what my job should be is to create a business where other people can somehow build their, employees, staff members can somehow discover their big why or some version of that. I don't believe that. I don't think that's the whole point of business. That's not my philosophy whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of an interesting subject. I think, happening on a macro level is this idea of social capital. And it's the idea as a business to be able to have to obviously priority one, make a profit, but also be able to have a positive impact on both your employees, your customers, and your community.
Can we level off there? You can't make a profit unless you're doing those other things.
Correct. Agree 100%.
Right? So being profit driven, having profit as your primary motive of being in business is not a popular thing. Me saying that is offensive to some people, I promise you. Because they want to think altruistically. They don't want to think like that. But the reality of it is the profits that you pull from your business, no matter what it is a direct mirror of essentially how well you're doing all those other things. But people try to do the other things before they actually learn how. It's like the agent who goes out and they, boom, got their real estate license, and the first thing everyone tells them to do is go buy leads. Go buy leads. And that's what they all do. But they don't know how to pre-qualify the leads. They don't know how to present. They don't even know the damn market. They don't know how to do anything. So people put the cart before the horse because they don't want to do the real work.
Yep.
And ultimately, when I talk to people in their 50s and their 60s and who've been some of the huge names, and I go through their, I talk about really personal financial stuff with them. It is extremely rare that some of the biggest names you've ever heard of before have any real money. They have no exit plan out of their brokerages and their teams and whatnot because they've never saved it. They never learned how to build it, how to multiply it. Because why? Because they never had enough profit out of their businesses to actually make something more than just basically a continuation of the transactional-based lifestyle. And they create what Julie and I call a golden cage, right? Nice country club life, 2 leased cars, they got a boat, they go to, have nice vacations. They live in a good part of the place. Everyone sees them as successful, but they are maybe best case scenario 6 months away from being completely financially destitute. And markets like this always play that out. And so when I'm talking to people, when I'm talking to you and I'm having these thoughts, and Julie and I are doing it on a podcast, what I'm actually thinking and feeling, just to make sure that I keep my ego at bay and I also stay tracked into the message, is I think back to all the people that Julie and I talk to during the previous financial crashes, but the biggest one being back in '07. And I remember friends, people we knew from Howard Brinton, frankly, that committed suicide, people that got divorced, people that blew up their businesses and never came back, because no one taught them the whole damn point of being in business is not to do all the altruism and try to be a role model and all that. You have to do all that in order to make a profit. You have to lead with profit first. And if you don't, you're never going to have profit. This idea that one day I'm going to sell 1 billion houses, I'm going to sell 500 houses, I'm going to sell whatever it is. I'm going to have this big ass team. And then all of a sudden I'm going to have, I'm going to be able to, blah, blah, blah. Nope, never happens, because you didn't build around the idea of profit first.
Hey, let's shift gears for a minute. I want to talk about the technology stuff for a minute. You touched on that briefly about how that could really help change the industry and help agents be much more.
It's exciting, no? It's super exciting.
Sure, yeah. Are there any companies you're following that are leveraging things like automated machine learning or, for example, blockchain technology? I think is fascinating in the title industry. Or anything AI related, what are some companies you're looking up to that are doing some really cutting edge stuff in the real estate industry?
No, I mean, honestly, they're just iterating on the same ideas. There's not really very many new ideas that are coming about. It's just sort of versions of the same thing that's been around forever. I mean, the AI conversation, that's like the most hyped up topic ever. I mean, and there's not going to be, there'll be AI that performs simple functions, but as far as the real evolution, I think, is going to come in the expectations of the buyers and the sellers from the agents they do business with ultimately. That's really where it's going to come from. Like video conferencing, like what we're doing now on Zoom, right? That's so fascinating to me. Julie and I are a podcast today. We talked about was Harvard and all these other Ivy League schools. They're all getting these really nasty class action lawsuits getting filed against them from their students who said, listen, your online experience sucked. We've been having to pay you normal tuition, and we haven't been receiving anything that should even remotely resembles the experience we should have been having. So what's that going to do? It's going to force Harvard, for example, then to really figure out how to do online education at a different level. Will they still be able to charge $150,000 for a 2-year degree if it's all done online? No, which that excites me, because that tells me it's going to open up all kinds of new things for entrepreneurs, because there's it's going to advance. It would have taken Harvard how long to actually build an online campus, a real viable one? Years, decades, maybe never. But now, because of the coronavirus, because of these forced quarantines, the craziness we're all experiencing, all these ideas that would have taken decades maybe to play out are now happening inside months. And when I see, and Julie and I talk about this on our podcast almost every day, you let your mind wander and you start thinking about what does that mean for the real estate industry? Well, there's the obvious low-hanging fruit things that everyone's talked about, virtual showings and doing more. Well, how about this? How many listing presentations could I give when I sold real estate per day? 2. And after that, it sucked, right? And so how many listing presentations do you give over a Zoom conference per day? A lot more. How can you get in front of more people faster? How can you do, for example, my mind just goes a billion different ways when I think about the leveling of the playing field that the pandemic is going to create. I also worry a lot, honestly. I worry for all the bricks and mortar brokerages that are out there. How are they going to survive? Agents and buyers and sellers weren't going to their markets or their offices in the first place. They're definitely not going to go there now. And here's another thing that's fascinating, where we live. I won't bore you with all the details, but how many of these, for example, real estate conventions, just keeping it into our space, right? How are you going to do a real estate convention in the future with all the different social distancing rules? But there's even the real reason that those things are going to be under such threat is the liability that's going to come, that if someone attends your event, if they get sick and all the, there's no errors in admissions insurance that's going to cover you in the event that basically you showed a house in that house and you brought coronavirus into their house, and then all of a sudden the seller gets sick. And, these are the types of interesting things that there's no answers to yet. I certainly don't know, but it's fascinating because there'll be something they'll be forced to birth from this that otherwise wouldn't have been. Does all that babbling make sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think some of the companies doing some really cutting edge stuff specific to real estate is the, you can get these apps. You can download it. There's a couple of different iBuyers doing this, for example, where you Open Door, for example, a few others launching apps and these lock boxes. So basically the consumer downloads the app on their phone and they can open up the lockbox to see inside a house. There's a video camera to make sure, they put one at the front door, the back door, et cetera. And so it's like, consumers can basically like self-show the houses and they don't need realtors to, actually escort them through the home. And I think it's brilliant. It's awesome. It's like, and it's great. It's amazing consumer experience, and the real value for the agent is in opening up the door. So yeah, I think there's some really cool stuff coming down the pipe.
Well, like I said, they're iterations of the old ideas. I think what we're going to see, Chris, in the next 12 to 24 months is we're going to really see the significant changes taking hold. We're going to really see what's going to replace the old technology with the new technology. But the first things to follow are the ones that were marginally holding on before, which is your obvious bricks and mortars locations and, some of these. The question you asked before, like, why aren't teams more profitable for the most part, right? Or you asked some question like that, which was great. And the answer, versus say back in the 90s, the answer is because the assumption is now that if you're going to have a team, and a lot of brokerages are set up this as well, you're going to be providing leads to your agents, right? And they're just hungry, pissed off birds, always asking for more leads. And then on top of that, you got the commission splits. They're going to demand more money. And on top of that, it's normalized now not to get a 6% commission anymore. In some of the luxury markets we have clients in, it's 5% or it's 4.5%. So when all this, margin erosion at the same time, these expenses have been increasing. So it really has squeezed that business model to the point where if you're coming in the business now and you think I'm going to form a real estate team, I would strongly suggest you sit with somebody who knows what they're talking about and you actually put pen to paper and figure out what the net margins are. And then ask yourself, all right, is this where you want to be in 5 years based on the amount of money you're going to earn from the best case scenario of the model you're following? And then make your business decision based off that.
Yep. Who's somebody you look up to in the industry outside of the brokerage you're affiliated with that you think is doing some interesting things on the tech side? So like what's your opinion? Like Redfin, for example, has like crazy huge staff of developers,
Yeah.
What's your opinion of Redfin, what they're doing, leveraging AI, machine learning, automating, the offer process for buyers? Like, where's your head at in terms of like who's doing some really cool stuff on the tech side? Maybe not Redfin, maybe it's Zillow. Like, who are some of the people you think are doing some really exciting stuff, and what specifically are they doing that you think is really cutting edge?
I don't know what your definition of exciting is. Things like if I were scanning through Inman and there's an article about, Zillow's new iBuyer program, I wouldn't read it. I got it. I understand what it is. Yeah. As far as what Redfin's doing, if you think about Redfin's business model, it's kind of fascinating. It's just a big scaled up team, where they have staff, where they have showing agents and they're giving them a portion of the thing. I admire him for doing it. He's an interesting entrepreneur, isn't he? Glenn, and he went and took the company public, and all the virtual showing thing you're talking about, he's actually trying to implement it. I admire him. I like how he's soft spoken. At the same time, he's very he's obviously one of these guys that doesn't necessarily know that he can kick your ass if you piss him off, mentally at least. I find that fascinating. EXP, truthfully, of all the things that are out there right now, I think EXP is that's what excites me the most. They own a company called Verbella. And last week, they had their shareholder summit, and normal shareholder summit, I read that they had something like 2,200 people show up total in a live event in Orlando. But last week, they had 15,000 unique IP addresses show up to their online shareholder summit. That's amazing. That was a whole freaking week, sometimes 6 and 7 hours a day. And 15,000 people showed up to watch on avatars on a screen do presentations. That's shocking is what that is. To think about the difference in the number of people they exposed to. Julie and I, they had us present a couple different things. And it's a bizarre experience at first. You're a little avatar and you're standing in front of this room full of, sitting in a conference room. But then if you let your mind go, you realize that's probably the future of virtually everything. And it's like conditionally, like my little 6-year-old, your 3-year-old's too young to really probably remember much of this, fortunately, to be honest with you, Chris, because Zoe gets a little scared. But I can see how Zoe's behaviors are going to change for the rest of her life because she was, in her very formidable years going through the coronavirus. How she interacts with people. She's probably not going to be as demonstrative as she used to be. No more, hugging and whatnot, because she's going to have this programming in her head. And how are all the people that are home-based businesses now? Everything in society is going to completely change. It's not just the 6 feet apart from each other. It's the lingering things that happens as far as behavioral change. That's what's interesting. To live through it's exciting.
Earlier, you touched on iBuyers for a minute on Inman News. What's your crystal ball say about iBuyers? I know you did a podcast recently about it, and I haven't had the pleasure of watching it yet. But what's your crystal ball say about the future of iBuyers?
Well, just for the sake of people that haven't been in the business for a long time, the iBuyers thing is just an iteration of We Buy Ugly Houses, right? That, again, not a new idea. What do I think? I think it's fascinating. I really do. I think it's like, you remember, what's that big auto, I have to write this down so I don't forget. I have like a brain block on this. There's a publicly traded they're all over Austin, where you take your car in there and they give you a price, they write it on a piece of paper, and that's it. And what's it called? You know what I'm talking about? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so CarMax changed the paradigm of the car space. They changed the paradigm, especially of the used car space. Or you could go in there and basically just get rid of the car. You don't have to shop at a bunch of different places. People like the flexibility of essentially here's the keys, here's the title, I'm going to walk away. There always is going to be a percent of people that want to do that versus trying to get every last nickel out of what they're selling, a car or a house or any asset, really. There's always going to be people that put just different priorities first, which is an interesting lesson for a lot of agents too. Very, very, very few people, even though you think money is the most important thing, or profit from the sale is the most important thing, or the lowest price is the most important thing for the buyer. Very, very rarely is that true. It's other things, convenience, it's hassle factor, it's how easy you're going to make the process. So if you're asking me what the future of those companies are, I don't think it's in the version that they are now, but I definitely think there's going to be a future. There's definitely an iBuyer type solution going forward. I even have the sort of fantasy of why doesn't someone come out with like an institutional investor, come out with a mechanism so they can create a white label iBuyer, so they can take it to somebody like you and they can say, Chris Waters, you now have your own iBuyer program. You're about to tell me you started, right? but we're going to totally back you. We've created a templated website. We've created a templated mechanism for all of it to work for you. And why haven't someone needs to come out with that so they can level up the iBuyer space, and then they put all the small and medium-sized brokers to work acting as mini iBuyers. I'll tell you the way EXP does it, which I think is great. You, as an agent, can go to the MLS and you can find a house, not even your own listing. And let's say there's some, it might make for a good house for an iBuyer. EXP's got their own iBuyer. You submit your, this is an offer, this is the property, these are the numbers, this is the spreadsheet. The iBuyer then decides to buy the property. You get paid the commission on that. It wasn't even your house. And then when they fix it up to flip it, you get the relist too. That's an interesting way to do it. I think that some version of that's going to be in the future, but there'll always be a percent of people that want to wholesale. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I can't. It's so funny, something you just brought up. I can't really disclose like something I'm working on.
There you go. Breaking news.
But yeah, I mean, I'll share with you. Like, I'm about to close a $100 million fund. That is predicated on this idea of like, if you can essentially offer an insurance policy to the consumer that if their home doesn't sell and they're willing to pay a premium up front for that you'll buy the property. And this is something that the agents can offer to consumers. And it's something that can be white labeled in a sense, like an iBuyer. And it's got the possibility of you're very familiar with the guaranteed sale program. So
right.
Think about this as kind of like a quasi insurance policy that people can offer, something they have to pay an upfront premium for. And then there's also a back end kicker if they do sign up for it. And whether they take advantage of it or not, think about it like an insurance policy. And if after a certain amount of time, the property hasn't sold and they want to capitalize on that insurance policy, the company will buy it from the consumer. The agent gets paid a commission, and the agent will relist it for this company. There's also another interesting iteration of this that a close friend of mine is working on, and he literally, it's public. He just this is on Inman. He just closed on $100 million. I think it was $104 million round, and it's called Homeward. And essentially, they're empowering agents and teams to be able to go to a consumer and tell them, we work with this partner called Homeward, and they will buy the home from you if it doesn't sell. and they will let you stay in that home until you pick out a new home, and they will provide the bridge financing if you want to keep your house on the market and wait for it to sell for a premium, and they'll buy the house you want using their cash, and they charge a 1.5% service fee. And then they also help you, refinance the property, and you can actually move into that new house if you want to, and you can rent it back from Homeward until your house sells, or if Homeward decides to take over ownership of it and sell it. It's really cool for the buy sell consumer, like someone that needs to sell and buy and they don't have the cash to turn around and buy, and like maybe they want to move out of their house so they don't have to deal with showings, like they have kids and stuff. It's pretty fascinating because you can use Homeward's cash to present an offer on a home, and a cash offer is going to look more advantageous and help you negotiate a lower price than one with financing, in which they could close on in like 5 to 10 days. Are you familiar with Homeward?
Actually, I think the guy who started that, isn't his first name Tim?
Yeah, it's Tim Heil.
Yeah. I think I knew Tim Heil from either Howard Britton or something like that. I think I've known that. I think I either know him or know his name. Yeah, but I did read that article, and several people sent it to me, and it is a good idea. It is, again, it's an iteration of the guaranteed home sale, just flipping it really. Those ideas are great. Mm-hmm. I like that honestly better than I like the iBuyer concept, because it's easier. If I were an agent selling that would actually be easier for me to sell than, hey, you got to take a 20% discount on your house.
Yeah, right. Yep. So, Tim, what do you see as like when you think about your business and as a CEO of your organization, your coaching and all of the things you're involved in, like, what's your big hairy audacious goal? You've become famous in the real estate space, and you've got a lot of different verticals from a wealth perspective. Like, what's the next 10 years look like for you? Are you still trying to push? Are you still trying to grow? Like, what's the big, hairy, audacious goal of your organization?
Well, I mean, right now we're growing, we're expanding, we're adding sales staff. Our business is actually, because of the virus, is taking off. It's fun for me to kind of see some of these snake oil ideas that have, percolated up since 2007 sort of wash out, because agents are realizing they, worked marginally well in the best of times. They're definitely not going to work now. Training organizations in hard times take off. That's just a fact. They're, that stocks for online universities and just different things, those are great places to invest. So we're positioned perfectly to take our business to the next level for sure. And Julie and I are looking at buying ranch land, there's so many different alternatives, forms of investment. If you want to take it out 5 years since you said that, I think we're going to be in a different economic, something we've never experienced in our lifetimes. There's no way there's going to be the unintended consequences, or maybe the intended consequences of all these trillions of dollars that are being pumped up to the economy. It's going to result in inflation, and that's going to create its own set of problems and, frankly, its own set of opportunities. We have always done well during times like this, and if you look back in history, the greatest fortunes of humanity have always been made during the greatest times of change. We're not there yet. The economy isn't, but we're going to be. And again, these programs that have come out, I mean, we're May 22nd. These programs have started to come out since the beginning of March, really. Those are only going to hold the wolves at bay for maybe another year. And then after that, you're going to see deflation. You're going to see a lot of deflation of asset values. And it's going to be, you're already seeing it. I mean, Lawrence Yun from National Association of Realtors said that the deflation on real estate this year is going to be about 15%. Long press release, like last 2 sentences, you could read it. And then he's saying in 5 years, he's predicting there's going to be inflation. I don't think it's going to last. I don't think it's going to take 5 years. There's trillions and trillions of dollars that are basically being injected into the economy. It's happened before, back in 2007. Where did the money go? It went into real estate. It went into the stock market and whatnot. And that's the reason that normal consumer items, we didn't sense the inflation. People have never lived through inflation. I was 6 and 7 during double-digit interest rates back in the late 70s, and so I only remember people talking about it. When Julie and I bought our first house in the early 20s, people said, congratulations, your interest rate's 7%. You did phenomenal, But now we see interest rates that are starting with a 2. You can get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate now for 2.75%.
So did I hear you correctly? Your prediction is that asset values go down over the next 5 years, or in 5 years, that's when they'll begin going down?
So again, I'm not an economist, and my crystal ball is no clearer than anybody else's. But I've been massively consuming this information. I really got interested in it basically back in 04, 05. It's an interesting, a guy named Jim Duvall actually turned me on to it, who I met at Howard Brennan, who is a billionaire, by the way. He's the one that told me that these cycles repeat themselves. He was a bit of a mentor or coach to me. And so he played out different things. Like, for example, I asked him, how did you become a billionaire? Stupid question, but simple. And it was actually in the late 90s when I asked him that question. He was just a farm boy from Indiana. He said, no money, didn't come from any money. He's passed away. And he said, what Marianne, his wife, and I did is we would save a certain percent of every check. We would save 10%, we'd save 20%. We increased it as we paid off of our debt. In ways we were able to move our own personal burn rate to a lower and lower number. Our earnings increased, and we were able to save more money, and then we started investing in other things. That's the financial model we followed. We've always led with profit, and we've looked at picking up opportunities, usually on sale, and then from that, we've gotten where we are financially. So if you're asking me what is pretty much baked into the economy right now, we're going to have a mini boom probably through fourth quarter, and there's I cannot see, and I have not read or heard any reason to believe that leading into 2021, it's going to be anything other than the playing out of what may be even called a depression, but probably a recession. It took us over 10 years from 07, let's say from 09 to last February. It took us that long to get the unemployment rate down to where it was. The unemployment rate now is higher than what it was even back at the peak of the last recession. That happened in 2 months. To think that there's going to be a sort of V-shaped recovery is insanity. 64% of all small businesses report that they're not planning on opening up again. So the devastation to the economy is going to be felt for at least 10 years. So if you're asking me what I'm doing, I'm thinking about what am I looking to invest in, right?
So you mentioned buying ranch land, and then you also mentioned about the devaluation of assets. So how are you timing the acquisition of ranch land to
Probably poorly, honestly. But so you have to think, where's money going to go? Like where's the money going to go this time? It's going to go initially. We're going to see, and this is what's going to be. It's like a red herring. Asset values like real estate and other assets where people were putting their money first. Those are going to inflate. But then what happens is that in the cycle of things, basically things then. They'll inflate, they're inflating now, and then they're going to deflate. And the deflation, nobody knows where it's at. So the Fed has been, since forever, they've been trying to get inflation back into the market. They haven't been able to do it even with all the trillions of dollars that they're printing constantly. And they've been doing it since, the QEs, wherever they're calling it now. They haven't been able to create real inflation. Well, they're going to get it now. Because it's over $10 trillion and no upward cap has been set. They're going to keep on pumping more money into the economy. They're buying all different forms of debt. They even said, this is crazy if you think about it. They even said that if needed, they're actually going to go into the stock market. They're going to start buying securities. So when you go to buy your stock in whatever company, the price is going to be the price you're paying because the Fed was essentially buying the shares up. It's not the real market. We're in some sort of weird, zombie land.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, they're trying to prevent deflation. Yeah. What's your opinion of cryptocurrency? Are you investing at all in any cryptocurrencies?
No, I think it's fool's gold. That's what I think. But it's funny down here where we're living. There's a guy named Peter Schiff, who you might know. He lives down here. We see him. Well, when the gym was open, we saw him every morning. And
he's very anti-crypto. Yeah, he's very pro-gold.
And so in the gym, right, yes. In the gym, it's so funny. Some of these, it's a beautiful gym, and some of these crypto guys will come up and start trying to engage them in conversation. And so it's so funny because he is so freaking smart, I'm working out and I'm listening to this banter going back and forth. And what Peter does is he just throws in little, and it doesn't even register. But I was listening, there's these three guys, nice conversation, and they were trying to challenge Peter on his stance towards crypto. And he just really totally ripped the underpinnings off of their argument. And they finally agreed that the only reason crypto is worth what it's worth is because somebody else, it's essentially like a shell game. And a lot of the guys in the crypto space, it would seem, are proponent of the halving and all these other things are happening. There's no real historical perspective on cryptocurrencies that would give it any kind of staying power beyond the belief of what the last guy thought it was worth. And the belief is, Peter's stance is, and it's probably true, is there's some big holders of crypto, and they're the ones that are the proponents of it mostly because they're trying to strategically get out of it. That's his stance. But you did mention gold. I think there's going to be absolutely, if you want to essentially create inflation, if the Fed wants to create inflation, all it has to do is raise the price of gold. And the Fed can do that by essentially, what president was it? Roosevelt, right? So what Roosevelt did is he made owning gold illegal. And then as soon as he took back all the gold, you know what he did right after that?
Took the U.S. The dollar off the gold standard.
Yeah, actually, that didn't happen until much later. What he did is he then said, now he controlled the gold. He then raised the price of the gold. That's what he did. So he's buying all this gold back for, say, $5 an ounce. And then as soon as he accomplished his goal, then he said, okay, now it's $7 an ounce. He controlled the market. And so that essentially, we didn't go off the gold standard until next.
Something interesting about currency, generally speaking, fiat currency, is that it's essentially just a function of people's belief in the currency.
Right. Which goes to why we're buying land, which goes to the reason why we're buying assets. That answers your own question.
So something, I guess for the record too, I don't own any cryptocurrency, but I am fascinated by blockchain technology and its ability to, disrupt the real estate industry. First ever transaction occurred in Switzerland last year. A commercial property was sold on the Ethereum network, and people bought it using using crypto. And it's on a platform called blockemo.ch. Crypto is huge in Switzerland. I'm sure if you've been following. Ultimately, again, back to currency being a function of people's belief. I mean, the belief in currency in the cryptocurrency is like it's getting high. Like it's when you think about where Satoshi Moko or whatever his name is that wrote the white paper report on Bitcoin, like that just happened, was it 10, 11, 12, 13 years ago or something like that. And so in 13 years or whatever the length of time is, the belief in this as a currency has risen dramatically. And if you think about from a technological perspective, it's very difficult for companies to build platforms and to operate, globally when you have to deal with all the intricacies of dealing with currency exchange and, overseeing transactions. It's super complex and difficult for technology companies to scale and just, deal with the complexities of that. So it seems like there's some really great use cases for crypto as an alternative currency.
But you realize what the ultimate cryptocurrency is, right? The ultimate cryptocurrency is not Bitcoin, it's the US dollar. The US dollar is in essence a cryptocurrency. It's all digital now.
Right. Yep.
So that's it.
My personal opinion is I don't think the US dollar ever goes away, but I do think that I think crypto will be an alternative asset. And I think there are these things called stable coins, which are pegged to things like the US dollar. And I think those could be some interesting things to leverage to, be able to take advantage of stuff around the world from a technology perspective.
There's a great book, Chris. I don't know if you've read it. You probably have, by Jim Rickards, called A New Case for Gold. It's maybe 5 or 6 years old, the book, but it's awesome. It's such, I didn't realize what a nerd you are. We're nerding out. I wonder how many of your people are still listening. But this stuff, I find this stuff really fascinating. But if you actually go, you can listen to read his book. He talks about how the U.S. became the global, the petrodollar, how it became the U.S., the global reserve currency after World War II. And you talk about how the central bankers, J.P. Morgan and all these people met at this place called the Jekyll Island off Georgia. You read all this, it's like, no way is that real history, but it is. And people don't realize that, what you're saying, currency, U.S. dollars, all of it. The U.S. Fed's it's not a public institution. It's a private thing owned by banks. And so our money is actually managed by the sort of third party that's sort of, loosely controlled by us. I think that's really fascinating. But I don't think Peter thinks that gold is going to become the new currency, and he thinks, in essence, and he's actually doing this, that you could put your gold in Peter's bank. He's forming a bank, and then you'll get a credit card, and when you spend money from your credit card, it actually results in some of your gold or your silver being sold, right? And then Jim Records believes there's going to be he doesn't believe, so Peter's thinking gold, US dollar on his deathbed. Jim thinks there's going to be a basket of currencies, which is really interesting. And he said that essentially this is what, long story short, so the basket of currencies would be some US dollars, some yuan, some, all euros, all this, and that would then form a new currency. So the new currency would be backed by all the fiat currencies of the old currencies. But really, why is anything worth what anything is, really, at the end of the day? Why is a house worth what a house is? How much of the demand for real estate has been fake, basically predicated on people's ability to borrow money? And how much of that borrowed money just comes from more fake money? Have you ever thought about that? It's interesting.
Well, I think if you think about the debt the U.S. government has, what is it, way north of 20 trillion now, you have to, you have to ask yourself, is it really debt if they don't actually plan on paying it back?
Yeah, and it's so interesting how I remember when I was growing up, the debt clock and how much, it was like a political thing. We have to pay off the debt. Debt's never going to get paid off because as a percent of GDP, and they have this new formula, it's like EBITDA accounting, where they're trying to figure out a different way to cover up the fact they're not making any profit. But when you look at essentially all of that, the debt's never going to get paid back. And the U.S. will never default on its debt. It's going to inflate its way out of the debt. It's going to print more dollars. That's what we're doing. That's what our country is doing. It's going to inflate its way. And if you go back in history, when the U.S. has had debt before, usually after wars, that's what they did. More money was printed, inflated its way out of the debt, paid the debt off with basically having printed more money. I mean, can you imagine if you had the printing press to essentially, print money anytime you wanted to with just congressional approval, or now it's not even with that? It's astonishing. And so, you ask yourself, what would prevent the U.S. currency from failing? And people say, well, it's the cleanest shirt in a hamper full of dirty shirts. Well, it's also because of military. It's also because essentially the fact that we have the strongest country in the history, all this stuff. And so I think you're right, and I agree with you. I don't think the U.S. dollar is going to go away, but I do think there's going to be a lot of pain that's going to be experienced. Have you ever heard of the debt jubilee? If you want to go seriously nerdy,
yeah.
Now, how cool is that? Do you know where that started? Do you know the history of the debt jubilee?
I do not.
Oh, you're Googling it. That's no fair. It goes all the way back to the Old Testament. So the Old Testament, it actually had, you're reading, I can tell, but every 50 to 75 years, all debt was forgiven. Huh. Now think about that. What if we're going to have, how long is it going to take for some politician to come up with saying, what?
Are you a subscriber to Stanberry Research?
No, I don't get his newsletter. I don't get the newsletter. Okay. But I know what you're talking about.
They've been talking about the debt jubilee recently.
Oh, I didn't know that. Cool. Yeah.
So, hey, Tim, we are way over on time, and you're right. Who the hell knows who's still watching at this point? But this has been a fascinating conversation, to say the least. What's the best way for people to reach out to you if they want to contact you about coaching or anything? Well,
just let me put my coaching hat on just for a second, okay? So the one thing we end up almost every podcast and everything we're saying, we say this because, again, emotionally, I don't want people to experience hardship and they don't realize that a lot of the things they're doing or what they're thinking, but mostly what they're doing is going to lead to severe hardship. So ask yourself if you're in any way waiting and hoping things return to normal like they were just 90 days ago, which is insane. Because if you're in that mental, emotional state of waiting for things to return to normal, you're not automatically, that means that you're not moving forward. You're not actually in the actions of learning what this new market is going to require. The conversation, the nerdball conversation you and I just had, that's part of it, because from these sort of, unassociated thoughts can come a really brilliant idea, right? That's the reason I think you and I were bouncing off each other, because it's kind of fun. Your brain's going here, it's going there. But for a practical, tactical standpoint, what everyone has to be focused on right now is survival. That's the number one thing that everyone has to be doing. You have to survive. If you cannot survive without the government lifelines, as soon as those run their course, the latter part of this year, you're done. So whatever you're doing now, real estate practitioners or small business owners, you've got to retool. You've got to stop hoping and praying things are going to return to normal. You've got to embrace what this new market has to give. you got to make it so, and start with the idea that everything that worked for you in the past market, it does not matter. This is not a true statement completely, obviously, but start with this. Everything that you were doing before, none of it's going to work in the market that's going to come. And if you don't start with that humbling thought, then you're not going to leave room for new ideas. You're going to say, damn it, I'm just going to go back to buying buyer leads, and I'm going to double down on my marketing. I'm going to drop off more pumpkin pies in November. You're just going to go back to the exact same things you were doing before. You're not going to actually expose yourself to new ways of thinking, and thus you're going to experience unnecessary pain and hardship that's could adversely affect the rest of your life. So for everyone who's listening, that's what I would strongly encourage all of them to do. Just know that you can get through this. You are literally designed to adapt to change. Don't resist that natural progression that your body and your soul wants to have. I'm not getting new agey or mindset-y on this last thing.
We all need to learn to adapt, and the faster we can adapt, the more prosperity we're going to have.
Exactly, man. The greatest fortunes in the history of humanity have always been made during the greatest times of change. So if people want to find us, it's timandjulieharris.com. Our podcast, you can just Google it. It's all over the internet. It's Real Estate Coaching Radio. Those are the two prominent ways.
Cool. Tim, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate your time. This has been great.
Cool.